Welcome to the strangest, most ridiculous, and perhaps most dangerous set piece in the history of professional sports. Forget the blinding lights of Las Vegas. Forget the majestic vaults of Madison Square Garden, where kings are usually crowned. We are in Lewiston, Maine. It is a tiny, sleepy industrial town lost in the woods, unheard of by anyone outside New England until this day. The date is May 25th, 1965. The setting is the Central Maine Youth Center, a hockey arena hastily converted into a boxing ring. Sounds like the start of a bad joke, or the script of a cheap B-movie, right? But why is the most anticipated fight of the decade, the rematch for the undisputed heavyweight title, taking place in a provincial ice palace before a paltry handful of 2,434 spectators? This is the first question that should raise your suspicions. After all, such events usually pack stadiums. But here, in a half-empty hall, where the echo of footsteps carries across the stands, reigns an atmosphere not of a celebration, but of a funeral. The air in the room is saturated not with excitement, not with the smell of hot dogs and beer, but with thick, sticky fear. If you look at the front row, you won't see Hollywood stars, but men in identical gray trench coats with stone faces. These are FBI agents. There are almost more of them here than real fans. They aren't watching the ring. They're watching the rafters, the dark corners, the hands of people reaching into their pockets. Why? Because in the corridors, the same information is being whispered. There will be no boxing today. Today there will be a murder. Just 3 months before this evening, in February 1965, Malcolm X, Muhammad Ali's former spiritual mentor, was publicly gunned down in Harlem. His body was riddled with bullets in front of a crowd. Ali, who by then had severed ties with Malcolm and pledged allegiance to the radical Nation of Islam, was now a target. Rumors circulated that supporters of the slain Malcolm were plotting revenge. Other rumors claimed that the Nation of Islam itself wanted to remove Ali to create a martyr. And still others whispered that the target was Sonny Liston, whose ties to the mafia had become too toxic for the criminal world. Imagine the level of paranoia. Ali's security checked every inch under the ring, expecting to find a bomb. Journalists who came to cover the fight seriously discussed the trajectory of a sniper's bullet if he fired from the balcony. This was not sport. It was Russian roulette, where only one empty chamber remained in the revolver cylinder, and into this cauldron of madness stepped two men. On one side is Muhammad Ali, young, brash, but in his eyes one can read the nervousness of a trapped beast. He understands that every loud pop in the hall could be the last sound he hears. On the other side is Sonny Liston, the big ugly bear, ex-champion, former mafia bone breaker, a man whose gaze, legend has it, could stop a heart. But today Liston looks strange. He is lethargic. He is distracted. It seems his thoughts are anywhere but in this ring. He knows about the rumors too, and perhaps he knows even more than Ali. Bell. The fight begins. But does it? Ali starts his famous dance, circling the lumbering Liston. Sonny tries to press, throwing left jabs, trying to corner the butterfly. A minute passes. Nothing substantial. Another 30 seconds pass. The audience begins to relax, thinking the threat has passed, and we are in for a long tactical duel, but then a glitch in reality occurs. The clock shows 1 minute and 44 seconds of the first round. Ali makes a barely perceptible movement with his hand. It doesn't look like a wind-up. It doesn't look like a punch capable of smashing a brick wall. It looks like the light crack of a whip. And suddenly a 100-kilogram mountain of muscle named Sonny Liston collapses to the canvas as if his strings were cut like a marionette's. The hall freezes. The silence is such that you can hear the buzzing of the lamps under the ceiling. People look at each other. What happened? Did he slip? Was he shot? No one saw the punch. Even the live commentators are bewildered. Referee Jersey Joe Walcott rushes around the ring, forgetting to start the count. Ali does not go to a neutral corner. He stands right over the body of the fallen monster, his face twisted with rage, and he screams a phrase that will go down in history. "Get up and fight, you bum. Nobody will believe this." Ali himself doesn't believe it. He knows he didn't put his weight into the punch. He knows that Liston, a man who took hits from sledgehammers, could not fall from such a poke. But Liston lies there. He rolls on the floor, arms spread, his eyes open, and there is no fog of a knockout in them. Something else is read in them. Calculation, fear, or maybe an order. The world has just witnessed what newspapers will call the phantom punch. But in that second, looking at this farce, millions of people ask themselves one question: did we just see a demonstration of superhuman speed or the greatest robbery in the history of sports? The answer to this question is hidden deep in the shadows, where boxing ends and the crime blotter begins. To understand the anatomy of this fall, we need to turn away from the ring for a second and look into the darkness from where these men came. Because if we are honest, Sonny Liston, lying on his back in the pose of a defeated beetle, is not just the result of a punch. It is the culmination of a life spent in slavery. You look at him and see a former champion, a formidable machine of destruction. But the men sitting in smoky offices in New York and Chicago saw something very different in him. To them, Sonny Liston was not a human being. He was an expensive racehorse that could be shot if it stopped turning a profit. Let's wipe away the gloss and look at the facts. Liston was an illiterate giant who learned to sign his name with an X. He came out of prison where his talent for breaking bones was noticed by the right people. And these people were not sports agents. They were Frankie Carbo and Blinky Palermo, capos of the Lucchese family, the shadow kings of boxing, who settled matters not with negotiations, but with lead pipes in back alleys. From the very first day of his professional career, Liston belonged to them, literally. His contract was structured so that the lion's share of his fees went into the pockets of gangsters, leaving Sonny only crumbs and the right to live. But why is this important precisely on that night in Lewiston? Because by 1965, the asset named Sonny Liston had become toxic. Imagine yourself in the shoes of the mob bosses. Your fighter lost the title in the first fight with Ali, refusing to come out for the 7th round due to a shoulder injury. The police are breathing down your neck. Congress is launching investigations into fixed matches, and Liston is becoming uncontrollable. He drinks. He attracts attention. He's becoming a liability. In the world of big crime, when an asset stops generating income and starts generating problems, it is liquidated or written off, and this is where fear enters the equation, colder than the ice in the arena. Liston was paranoid, but his paranoia had valid grounds. Before the fight, strange people visited his camp. He was hinted that his victory was undesirable, but on the other side of the barricades, the threat was even more real. Radicals from the Nation of Islam, standing behind Ali, created an atmosphere of religious fanaticism. Persistent rumors circulated that if Liston started beating their prophet, he would not leave the ring alive. Sonny found himself between a rock and a hard place. If he beats Ali, he angers the mafia, who perhaps bet on the young and popular champion to cash in on the odds. If he beats Ali, he might catch a bullet from fanatics right during the celebration. Victory promised him only death or prison. And what did defeat promise? Defeat meant freedom. Defeat meant a check he could cash and a one-way ticket out of this nightmare. When you look at the fight from this angle, Liston's strange behavior begins to acquire a frightening logic. He didn't enter the ring to fight. He entered to look for an exit. In the first minutes of the fight, Liston moved mechanically. He threw jabs, but they lacked his famous killing power. He looked like an actor waiting for his cue to leave the stage. And when Ali threw that short, sharp right hand, Liston saw in it not a threat, but an opportunity. The opportunity he had been waiting for. The punch landed on the temple. Was it painful? Probably. Was it enough to knock out a man who had withstood blows from heavyweights for years? Hardly. But for Sonny, it was a signal. Here it is, my exit. He fell. He did it theatrically, perhaps even too theatrically, overacting in his attempt to portray a knockout. And while he lay on the canvas, listening to Ali's screams and the roar of the crowd, one thought likely spun in his head. Don't get up. Just don't get up. If you get up, the game continues, and the stakes become real. But even in this perfectly planned fall, something went wrong. The chaos that ensued immediately after the knockdown turned the fix into a farce, causing the world to doubt not only Liston's honesty, but the competence of boxing rules themselves. And it was the referee's actions in the next 30 seconds that finally buried the reputation of this sport. Let's cast aside conspiracy theories for a second and turn to cold, ruthless physics. Was there a punch? Yes. Slow-motion footage, analyzed frame by frame later, shows Ali's right hand did meet Liston's temple. It was not a hallucination. It was the so-called anchor punch, a short, corkscrewing cross that Ali was taught by aging comedian Stepin Fetchit. The point of this punch is not power, but invisibility. It is delivered at the moment when the opponent's foot lifts off the floor, disrupting his balance. Biomechanically, such a blow can indeed knock someone down. But can it knock a man whose jaw was forged from granite out cold? And here begins the real theater of the absurd. Look at Muhammad Ali's reaction. This is a key psychological marker that destroys the theory that Ali was part of the conspiracy. If you knew your opponent was going to dive according to a script, what would you do? You would raise your hands. You would smile for the cameras. You would start celebrating easy money. But Ali does exactly the opposite. He goes into a frenzy. He doesn't believe his eyes. He stands over Liston's body, his face contorted with anger, screaming, "Get up and fight, sucker!" He waves his glove, urging the giant to rise. Ali feels cheated. He wanted a great battle. He wanted to prove to the world that he is the king. But instead, he was slipped a cheap fake. His rage is genuine. He looks like a man who has had his victory stolen, even though formally he has just won. But while Ali rages, another disaster is happening in the ring, one often forgotten. In the center of this hurricane stands the referee, Jersey Joe Walcott, a great champion in the past, but on this evening, an absolutely bewildered old man who has lost control of the situation. According to boxing rules, the knockout count cannot begin until the attacking boxer goes to a neutral corner. Ali does not leave. He dances around Liston. Walcott tries to shoo Ali away, wasting precious seconds, then returns to Liston, then back to Ali. At this time, the timekeeper at ringside, Francis McDonough, is banging on the canvas, counting the seconds. But the referee doesn't hear him. Walcott isn't counting. Liston lies on his back, rolls over, looks at the referee, waits. He lies there for a long time. Too long. 12 seconds? 17? No one knows for sure. At some point, Liston, realizing the circus has dragged on, clumsily gets to his feet. And then happens what finally turns this fight into a farce. Walcott, wiping sweat from his brow, restarts the fight. You heard right. Liston got up, and they started fighting again. Ali went on the attack, pinning Sonny to the ropes. The audience is in shock. But suddenly, Nat Fleischer, the editor of the Ring magazine sitting near the timekeeper, intervenes in this chaos. He starts screaming frantically and waving his hands, calling the referee over. Walcott stops the fight for the second time. He goes to the ropes, listens to Fleischer yelling, "He was down for more than 10 seconds. The fight is over." And only then, almost half a minute after the actual fall, Walcott raises Ali's hand. You understand the level of madness? The world champion was determined not by a punch, not by a referee, but by a journalist sitting in the front row who reminded the judge of the rules. Liston stood in the corner looking as if he had just woken up and didn't understand where he was. Ali looked confused. The crowd began to boo so loud it was deafening. Instead of a triumph of sport, we got a crime scene where evidence was scattered in plain sight, but no one wanted to collect it. But the most important question remained open, pulsing in the temples of everyone present. Why did Liston, who got up and even continued to fight, lie there for those critical seconds? The answer to this question lies not in physiology, but in what Sonny saw while lying on the floor, and it was scarier than any fist. Let's be brutally honest and ask the question that has hung in the air for over half a century. Could Sonny Liston have gotten up? The answer is hidden, not in medical records, and not in the power of Ali's punch. The answer lies on the surface if you look closely at exactly how the big bear behaved on the ring canvas. When a boxer is in a deep knockout, his body goes limp, muscles lose tone, and consciousness shuts down. But Liston was not shut down. He fell, rolled onto his back, and then made a movement that gave him away completely. He lifted his head and looked straight into the eyes of his corner. It was not the look of a man lost in space. It was the look of a man checking the clock. In that moment, two realities collided in the ring. The first was the physical pain from the blow to the temple. It was real, but for a fighter of Liston's level, bearable. The second reality was cold, cynical calculation. Liston lay there listening to the roar of the crowd, but even louder, he heard the voice of his own fear. Later, in rare interviews, he would put forward a version that sounds like a schoolboy's excuse. I didn't hear the referees count. He claimed that Ali, standing right over him and screaming curses, drowned out the judge's voice. That guy is crazy, Liston would say. I didn't want to get up while he was standing over me. I thought he was going to stomp on me. Sounds logical? Perhaps. Ali did indeed violate the rules by refusing to go to a neutral corner. He behaved like a street fighter, ready to finish off a prone opponent. But let's dig deeper. Did the scariest man in boxing, a former mafia enforcer, really get scared of a screaming 23-year-old kid? Or was he scared of something else? Here we return to the dark figures in gray trench coats. There's a theory that turns this farce into a tragedy. Liston was up to his ears in debt. His career was heading towards sunset. The mafia controlling his life understood. You can't make much on a Liston victory. He's the favorite. But if the favorite loses in the first round, the odds on such an outcome were astronomical. Throwing the fight meant not just getting a paycheck. It meant writing off debts and buying himself a life. Lying on his back, Liston was perhaps solving the most complex equation of his life. If he gets up and starts fighting, he risks losing for real in the later rounds while sustaining serious injuries. If he gets up and wins, he risks angering people who know where his wife and children live. And if he stays down, yes, he will be called a coward. Yes, he will be booed. But he will walk out of this hall on his own 2 feet, alive and free. In boxing, there's a cruel saying, better to be a coward for 5 minutes than a dead man for a lifetime. In those endless seconds, while referee Jersey Joe Walcott rushed around the ring trying to restore order, Liston made his choice. He chose the path of least resistance. He betrayed the sport, betrayed the fans, but he saved himself. However, there was a third variable that is often kept silent: fear of the fanatics. Liston knew that the Nation of Islam stood behind Ali. He knew that Malcolm X was killed for less than publicly humiliating their idol. In Liston's paranoid mind, every round won against Ali brought him closer to a sniper's bullet. Why risk getting hit in the head for 15 rounds if you can end it all right now and disappear? When Liston finally clumsily rose, and then the fight resumed and was stopped again, there was no disappointment in his eyes. There was emptiness. He played his role. Ali's punch was real, but the knockout was fake. It was not a victory of skill over strength. It was a victory of fear over pride. Sonny Liston was not knocked out by a fist. He was broken by circumstances, And in the moment he decided not to get up, the great boxer died, giving way to a frightened man who just wanted to go home. But did he know that this decision would haunt him even to the grave? Sonny Liston took the truth with him, but he didn't do it immediately. After that night in Lewiston, when the crowd booed him and the newspapers dragged his name through the mud, he lived another 5 agonizing years. But was it a life? Rather, it was the slow fading of a ghost. The boxing world, which once trembled at his mere glance, now turned its back on him. He became an outcast, a walking joke, a symbol of everything dirty and corrupt in sports. He was stopped on the street not to ask for an autograph, but to ask, "Hey, Sonny, how much were you paid for that dive?" And every such question killed him faster than any punch from Muhammad Ali. But if you think the story of the Phantom Punch ends in the ring, you are deeply mistaken. The real finale of this drama took place on January 5th, 1971, in Las Vegas. Sonny's wife, Geraldine, returned home from a trip and smelled a strange, heavy odor. She found her husband in the bedroom. He had been dead for several days. His body was bloated, and blood had caked on his face. The scene was so horrifying that even coroners, accustomed to everything, were shocked. The official police version stated death from natural causes, heart failure, and lung congestion. A syringe and a small amount of narcotics were found near the body. It would seem the case is closed, a typical end for a broken boxer seeking solace at the bottom of a needle. But here, just like in that ill-fated fight of 1965, the details begin screaming that the official version is a lie. There is one fact about Sonny Liston that all his close friends and trainers knew. A fact that turns the suicide or accidental overdose version into a real detective story. Sonny Liston was terrified of needles to the point of panic. This giant, who went up against the scariest men on the planet, would faint in a doctor's office at the sight of a regular syringe for a vaccination. The thought that he could independently, voluntarily stick a needle into his own vein sounds as absurd as the thought that he could become a ballerina. So what happened in that house in Vegas? Conspiracy theories flared up with renewed vigor. Many are sure that the mafia, the very men in gray trench coats who controlled his career, came to collect the final debt. Sonny knew too much. He was a living witness to the dirty schemes of the 50s and 60s. Perhaps he started talking, or perhaps he started demanding money for his silence about that very fight in Lewiston. In the world of organized crime, there is no statute of limitations, and a hot shot is a classic way to silence a person forever, disguising murder as an accident. Liston's death put a grim period in the debate about the 1965 fight. We will never know for sure if Ali's punch was that strong or if Liston fell on orders. That secret went into the ground with him, leaving us only grainy footage and endless questions. And what about Ali? For him, this fight became a springboard into eternity. The Phantom Punch became part of his mythology, proof of his divine speed. He became an icon, a symbol of struggle and freedom. But if we cast aside the legends and look the truth in the eye, we see a tragedy. On that evening in Lewiston, Ali did not defeat an opponent. He defeated a broken man, cornered by circumstances, debts, and fear. The story of the Ali versus. Liston the second fight is not a lesson in boxing. It is a lesson on how the real world works outside the glossy covers of magazines. It is a story that sometimes one man's victory is built on the ruins of another's life. Was there a punch? Yes. Was it a knockout punch? Most likely not. Sonny Liston did not fall from physical force. He fell under the weight of the system that created him and that destroyed him. And perhaps that is why Ali, standing over him that evening, looked so disappointed. He knew he won the fight, but he felt he lost the story. In the end, there were 2 hostages in that ring. One just managed to escape, while the other remained lying there forever, waiting for the lights to go out.